All right, let's jump right into one of the most important units in all of AP Human Geography, population and migration. We're going to break down the key patterns and processes you absolutely need to know to crush your exam.
So why does this unit matter so much? Well, look at that number. Unit 2 is a huge chunk of your final exam score. Getting these concepts down isn't just interesting, it's absolutely critical for getting that 4 or 5.
Okay, here's our game plan. We'll start with where people live and why. Then we'll look at how populations grow and shrink. After that, we'll see how governments try to influence those numbers and why people move from place to place. And of course, we'll wrap it all up with the must-know takeaways for test day. First up, let's get a handle on the basics. With about 8 billion people on the planet, where is everybody? And why are they there? It's way more than just a head count. It's about understanding the deep patterns of where we all choose to live.
You know, here's a wild thought. Our planet is enormous, but most of us are packed into a surprisingly tiny sliver of it. Geographers call this settled land the ecumene, and it's only about 5% of the Earth's surface. And within that small area, we see these 4 massive population clusters.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because not all density is the same. Arithmetic density gives you the simple average number, but physiological density, that's the one that tells a story. It shows you the pressure a country is under to feed its people from its farmable land. And agricultural density, that's your clue to how technologically advanced its farming is.
Okay, population pyramids. Think of these as a geographer's crystal ball. In one simple graph, you get a country's whole demographic story, its past, its present, and even a pretty good idea of the challenges it's going to face in the future.
And just look at the contrast here. A wide base, like what you see in the Congo, means a youth bulge. That means huge challenges, like how do you educate and find jobs for all those young people? But then you look at Germany with its narrow base. That signals a totally different problem, an aging, shrinking population, and a future with not enough workers.
So we've got our snapshot of where people are. But populations don't just sit still, right? They are always moving, growing, shrinking. So how do we actually track and predict these changes over time?
You can think of these 4 metrics as the dashboard for a country's population. They all work together to give us the rate of natural increase, which is just the growth rate before you factor in migration. And pay close attention to that TFR. The magic number there is 2.1. That's the replacement level, where a population can sustain itself. Now we've arrived at what is, without a doubt, the most important model in this entire unit, the demographic transition model. You have to know this. It's the framework that connects a country's economic development to its population patterns across these 5 stages.
So let's take a closer look. See how stage 2 is where the population explosion happens? That's because things like sanitation and medicine get better, so the death rate plummets, but the birth rate stays high. Then, as a country develops, you eventually get to stage 5, like in Japan, where the birth rate has fallen so low that the population is actually shrinking.
And the ETM works right alongside the DTM. It's a pretty simple idea, really. As societies develop, what we die from changes. We go from worrying about things like infectious diseases to managing chronic illnesses like heart disease that come from living longer lives. This brings us to a really old, but still super relevant idea. Way back in 1798, a guy named Thomas Malthus saw the population boom of the Industrial Revolution and asked a huge question. Can we actually feed ourselves if our population grows exponentially, but our food supply only grows arithmetically? It's a debate that's still raging today.
But hang on, population change isn't just some natural process that happens on its own. Governments have a huge say. They actively try to steer their country's demographic future with different policies.
So when governments want to step in, they basically have 2 main tools in their toolbox. If they're worried about an aging population and not enough workers, like in Russia, they use pro-natalist policies to encourage more babies. But if they're worried about overpopulation and strained resources, like China was, they use anti-natalist policies to slow things down. And this little phrase, more books, less babies, it pretty much sums up one of the most powerful forces changing demographics today. As women get more access to education and jobs, fertility rates almost always go down. It's that simple. Empowering women changes everything.
So what happens when a country gets to stage 4 or 5 of the DTM? They hit a major hurdle, an aging population. This puts a massive strain on things like pensions and healthcare. The dependency ratio, that's the number of non-workers compared to workers, just skyrockets.
I mean, imagine going from 10 workers supporting 2 retirees to 10 workers supporting 6 retirees. That's a huge economic problem. Okay, last big piece of the puzzle. People don't just stay put. Migration is the third critical part of population change, and it is constantly redrawing the map of who lives where.
You can think of every single migration story as a balance of push and pull. Push factors are the bad things: war, poverty, disasters that force people to leave their homes. And pull factors are the good things: jobs, freedom, family, that act like magnets, drawing them to a new place.
And we usually break migration down into 2 big categories. You've got forced migration, where someone has no choice. They have to move to survive, like a refugee fleeing a war. Then you have voluntary migration, where someone makes a choice to move, usually for a better job or a better life. You know, one of the biggest economic effects of all this movement is something called remittances. This is the money that migrants send back home to their families. And for countless families, and even for some entire countries, it's an absolute economic lifeline. And that number, $766 billion, it's just staggering. To put that in perspective, that is way more than all the foreign aid given by all the countries in the world combined. It just shows you the incredible economic power of migration on a personal and a global scale. Okay, let's wrap this up. For the exam, here's what you need to focus on. Absolutely master the DTM and ETM. Know your population pyramids inside and out, and have a rock-solid understanding of push versus pull factors and the effects of migration. If you can do that, you are going to be in fantastic shape. So we'll leave you with this to think about. All these patterns we've talked about, aging countries, countries with huge youth populations, and this massive wave of global migration, they aren't just topics for a test. They are the real-world forces actively creating the political, economic, and cultural world of tomorrow.